June 6, 1944, 0600 hours, English Channel. 4 miles off the coast of Normandy. The grey dawn struggles to break through the overcast sky, mirroring the churn in the stomach of Private First Class Robert Sales. Huddled inside the heaving steel tub of a Higgins boat, the air is thick with the acrid stench of diesel fumes mixed with the sour smell of seasickness. 30 men stand shoulder to shoulder, encased in waterlogged wool and burdened by 60 pounds of gear that feels like an anchor. The Atlantic Ocean is not cooperating today as 6-foot swells hammer against the flat bow of the landing craft, sending freezing sheets of salt water over the gunwales to soak the trembling infantrymen of the 116th Infantry Regiment. To the rear of the landing craft, the massive distinct shapes of the battleships USS Texas and USS Arkansas dominate the horizon. They unleash a thunderous chorus of 14-inch shells that scream overhead like freight trains tearing through the sky. The sound is deafening, a physical pressure that rattles the helmets of the men in the boats. Every soldier praying in the LCVP believes that nothing could possibly survive such an apocalyptic bombardment. They have been told by their commanders that the beach will be a moonscape of craters, offering ready-made foxholes for cover. They expect the German bunkers to be smashed concrete tombs, silenced long before the first American boot touches the sand. However, a critical failure is unfolding invisibly above the cloud layer. Over 300 B-24 Liberators are roaring over the coast, carrying 1,300 tons of bombs destined for the Omaha defenses. The plan calls for an immediate saturation strike to obliterate the resistance nests just seconds before H-hour. But the heavy overcast completely obscures the target markers, forcing the bombardiers to rely on radar or wait precious seconds to avoid hitting their own approaching landing craft. Terrified of dropping their ordnance on the American waves bobbing below, the air crews delay their release. The delay is fatal to the plan, as thousands of bombs fall harmlessly into the fields 3 miles inland, inside Widerstandsnest 62. The view is terrifyingly clear. Obergefreiter Heinrich Severloh peers through the narrow slit of his concrete emplacement. The naval bombardment has shaken the earth, sending dust and debris raining down from the bunker ceiling. But the guns remain operational. The terrifying wall of explosions that the Americans counted on has mostly landed behind the ridge or in the water. Severloh checks the ammunition belts for his MG-42 machine gun, ensuring the feed is clean. To his left and right, the 75mm artillery pieces are dialed in on the waterline. They are not destroyed. They are awake, angry, and waiting for the targets to enter the kill zone. The geography of Omaha Beach itself is a natural fortress designed for slaughter. The crescent-shaped shoreline spans 4 miles, flanked by towering limestone cliffs that trap any attacker in a confined arena. At low tide, the distance from the water's edge to the shingle bank is nearly 400 yards of completely exposed sand. There is no cover, there are no trees, no rocks, and thanks to the failed bombing run, there are no craters. The Germans have enhanced this natural killing ground with thousands of obstacles. Rommel's asparagus, steel hedgehogs, and Belgian gates tipped with Teller mines jut from the sand like jagged teeth. The assault plan relies heavily on the duplex drive tanks to provide immediate fire support. These swimming Shermans are supposed to launch 5,000 yards out and arrive 5 minutes before the infantry to suppress the bunkers. But the sea state is far too rough for their canvas screens. In the chaotic swells, the 30-ton steel beasts take on water instantly. One by one, the tanks of the 741st Tank Battalion swamp and sink like stones, taking their crews down into the murky depths. Of the 29 tanks launched for the eastern half of the beach, 27 sink before they ever fire a shot. The landing craft, vehicle, personnel, or LCVPs, struggle to maintain formation as they close the final mile. The young coxswains, many of whom are piloting a boat in combat for the first time, fight the tiller against the cross-current. They are under strict orders to land at specific sectors designated dog green, dog white, and easy red. But the smoke from the naval gunfire and the strong tidal current are pushing the entire flotilla eastward. The meticulously planned assault waves are drifting out of position. Units are becoming mixed, and cohesion is breaking down before the ramps even drop. Confusion begins to replace confidence. Inside the lead boats of Company A, 116th Infantry. The mood shifts from nausea to a cold, paralyzed dread. The men check their rifles, ensuring the plastic bags protecting the weapons from salt water are loose enough to rip off instantly. They are the tip of the spear. The National Guard boys from Bedford, Virginia. They have trained together for years, playing baseball on weekends and drilling in armories. Now, they are staring at a shoreline that looks ominously intact. The naval fire lifts, shifting inland to avoid hitting the troops. A sudden, haunting silence falls over the water, broken only by the slap of waves against the hull. As the boats grind closer, the menacing shapes of the beach obstacles loom large. The engineers known as the Gap Assault Teams are supposed to be blowing channels through these steel traps right now. However, most of the engineers have been landed in the wrong spots or have lost their explosives in the surf. The obstacles remain fully intact, creating a devil's garden of steel and high explosives. The coxswains have to navigate a slalom course through the mines, terrified that a single wrong turn will blow the boat and its 30 occupants into oblivion. The tide is rising fast, concealing the mines under the frothy surf. The floor of the landing craft is awash with a mixture of seawater and bile. Men are vomiting on their boots and on their neighbors. Too weak from seasickness to care about dignity, the specially treated army uniforms, impregnated with chemicals to resist gas attacks, trap the heat and the smell, making the nausea worse. Some soldiers are so debilitated that they do not care if they live or die. They just want to get off the rocking boat and onto solid ground. The officers scream over the engine noise to keep heads down and lock weapons, trying to instill focus into the misery. High on the bluff at WN 62, the German artillery spotters have their rangefinders locked on the approaching swarm. They communicate via field telephones to the mortar crews situated in the Tobruk pits behind the trenches. The coordinates for the waterline have been pre-calculated for years. Every inch of the sand is mapped and registered. The MG-42 gunners adjust their tripods, creating interlocking bands of fire that will cross-hatch the beach in a web of lead. They watch the square ramps of the Higgins boats bobbing in the surf, counting the seconds until they present a flat, stationary target. The intelligence briefings given to the assault troops describe the defenders as second-rate units. They were told the German 716th Infantry Division was manned by old men and reluctant conscripts from the east who would surrender at the first sign of trouble. This information is tragically outdated. Unbeknownst to Allied intelligence, the battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division has moved into the area for training exercises. These are not old men. They are veterans of the Eastern Front, disciplined and well-equipped. They are currently manning the very bunkers that were supposed to be empty, and they are fully alert. At 0628 a.m., the lead craft are 200 yards out. The coxswains gun the engines to drive the boats onto the sandbar. The metal hulls scrape against the bottom with a grinding screech that vibrates through the boots of the soldiers. The boats shudder and come to a halt, but they are not on dry land. A deep runnel of water separates the sandbar from the true beach. The water is neck-deep here, a final treacherous moat before the killing ground. The ramps are still up, blocking the view, leaving the men in a box of steel, blind to what awaits them. Captain Taylor Fellers, commanding Company A of the 116th, stands near the front of his craft. He knows the weight of the moment. He is leading the first wave into Sector Dog Green. He expects heavy resistance, but he trusts the support plan. He looks at his watch, ticking toward 0630. He shouts final instructions, but his voice is swallowed by the engine roar. He checks his carbine one last time. He does not know that he and every man in his boat has less than 5 minutes to live. The concept of leadership is about to be replaced by the concept of survival. The silence from the shore is suddenly broken, not by the Germans, but by the last frantic rockets fired from the specialized landing craft. These tank-like vessels, fitted with rocket launchers, unleash a barrage meant to saturate the beach, whooshing over the heads of the infantry. Thousands of rockets streak toward the bluffs, but like the bombs before them, they fall short, splashing uselessly into the water or exploding on the very edge of the tide line. The smoke from these explosions drifts across the water, briefly obscuring the view of the bunkers, adding to the confusion without damaging the enemy. The hand of the coxswain moves to the lever that controls the ramp. It is the final mechanism of the approach. Chains rattle as the heavy steel door begins to lower into the surf. The barrier between the men and the war is disappearing. Daylight floods into the dark hull, revealing the stretch of grey sand ahead. For a split second, there is a tableau of stillness. The men brace themselves to charge. Muscles tensed, adrenaline spiking. The first rows of soldiers stare out at the bluffs. Seeing the dark slits of the pillboxes staring back, the ramp hits the water with a splash. This is the moment the Germans have been waiting for. The wait order is lifted, as the steel door falls flat, exposing the tightly packed interior of the boat to the shoreline. The first German machine gun opens fire. It is not a sporadic burst, it is a continuous rip of canvas-tearing noise. The bullets hammer into the open ramp, sparking against the steel and tearing into the flesh of the men in the front row. The water turns red instantly. The invasion has begun, and the plan has already failed. The moment the heavy steel ramps of the landing craft slam down into the surf at 0630 a.m., the world dissolves into a cacophony of screeching metal and tearing flesh. In the lead boat of Company A, the 30 men inside do not even have time to scream. A barrage of machine gun fire from the bluffs directly ahead rakes the open bow. Acting like a scythe cutting through wheat, the first row of soldiers, burdened with heavy packs and flamethrowers, is cut down instantly before they can take a single step. Their bodies tumble forward into the knee-deep water, creating a gruesome barricade of corpses that blocks the exit for the men behind them. The sound of the German MG-42 machine guns is not the rhythmic rat-a-tat familiar from training films. It is a continuous, ripping canvas noise, firing 1,200 rounds per minute. The air around the boats is filled with supersonic cracks as bullets break the sound barrier inches from the soldiers' heads. Sparks fly where rounds hammer against the steel gunwales of the Higgins boats, sending jagged metal fragments into the faces of the crouching infantry. There is no cover, no strategy, and no orders that can be heard over the din. The neatly organized assault waves are instantly reduced to desperate mobs of terrified individuals fighting for seconds of survival. Realizing that running down the ramp is a sentence of certain death, men in the rear of the boats frantically scramble over the high gunwales, hurling themselves into the sea. But the water here is deeper than the intelligence reports indicated, often dropping into runnels 6 or 7 feet deep. Soldiers carrying 60 to 80 pounds of ammunition, radios, and wet wool uniforms plunge into the freezing channel and sink like stones. The life belts they wear are often improperly worn or insufficient to counter the crushing weight of their gear. Panic sets in as they thrash in the murky water, fighting a silent battle against drowning while bullets slap the surface above them. For the men of Company A, the 116th Infantry Regiment, this is not just a military disaster, it is the systematic extermination of a community. These are the Bedford Boys, National Guardsmen from the small town of Bedford, Virginia. Brothers, cousins, and neighbors who grew up farming and playing baseball together are now dying together in the bloody surf of France. Within minutes of H-hour, the town of Bedford is suffering the highest per capita loss of any American community during the war. Men watch their siblings disintegrate under mortar fire or disappear beneath the waves, unable to stop and help because pausing means joining the dead. Captain Taylor Fellers, the commanding officer who had studied the maps of Omaha Beach relentlessly, never makes it to the sand. As his boat grounds on the sandbar, he and his crew are immediately targeted by the concentrated fire from the Vierville draw. The Germans have identified the officers by the vertical stripes on the back of their helmets and their lack of heavy packs. Snipers and machine gunners prioritize these targets to decapitate the unit's leadership. Fellers falls into the water, and within moments, almost every officer and NCO in Company A is killed or wounded. The unit is effectively leaderless before the invasion is 5 minutes old. The surf at Dog Green sector begins to change color, turning a frothy, opaque pink as blood mixes with the churning Atlantic. The tide is rising rapidly, pushing the dead and the wounded toward the shingle. Bodies wash back and forth in the macabre rhythm of the waves, tangling with the heavy iron hedgehogs and wooden stakes planted by Rommel. The wounded men who drop in the shallow water face a horrific fate, unable to crawl due to their injuries or the weight of their packs. They are slowly drowned by the incoming tide. their cries for help silenced by the roar of the ocean and the explosions of mortar shells. From the bluffs, the German mortar crews in the Tobruk pits begin to drop their rounds with terrifying precision. They do not need to aim. The coordinates for the waterline have been pre-registered for months. High explosive shells rain down on the struggling survivors, throwing geysers of water and sand into the air. The concussion of a mortar round hitting the water is magnified, crushing the internal organs of men submerged nearby, even if they are not hit by shrapnel. The beach becomes a slaughterhouse where the air is filled with flying sand, body parts, and the desperate screams of the dying calling for medics who are themselves dead. The combat medics who manage to reach the shore find themselves overwhelmed and targeted. In the chaos of the landing, the red crosses on their helmets and armbands offer no protection. To the defenders, they are just more silhouettes in olive drab. Those who stop to treat the wounded are cut down, their medical kits lost in the surf. Plasma bottles shatter, morphine syrettes are dropped in the panic, and bandages are rendered useless by the salt water and sand. A medic might manage to drag a wounded soldier behind a steel obstacle, only to have the cover slowly disappear as the tide swallows the beach yard by yard. The geography of Sector Dog Green acts as a funnel for the carnage. The beach here is dominated by the Vierville Draw, a natural valley that leads inland, which the Americans intended to use as a primary exit route. Because of its strategic importance, it is the most heavily defended point on the entire beach. The bunkers, known as WN-71 and WN-72, overlook the landing zone from a perfect vantage point, creating a crossfire that leaves no blind spots. The plan to blind these bunkers with smoke has failed, and the tanks that were supposed to suppress them are at the bottom of the channel. The infantry is walking naked into the teeth of the fortress. Those few soldiers who manage to wade through the nightmare of the surf zone collapse behind the first line of beach obstacles. They huddle behind the steel tetrahedrons and hedgehogs, shivering uncontrollably from the cold and shock. The ping-ping-ping of bullets striking the metal obstacles is constant, a reminder that moving even an inch into the open means death. They are exhausted, their weapons are jammed with sand, and their radios are waterlogged. They look left and right for their squad leaders, only to find strangers or corpses. The cohesion of the unit has been shattered. There is no Company A anymore, only scattered survivors praying for a miracle. In the midst of this annihilation, acts of desperate bravery go unnoticed and unrecorded. A sergeant drags a drowning private by the collar, pulling him onto the wet sand before being shot in the back. A soldier with a blown-off arm tries to stand and fire his rifle one-handed before collapsing. Men vomit from seasickness while bullets kick up sand into their faces. The sensory overload is absolute. The mind shuts down. Reverting to pure animal instinct, the training on the moors of England breaks down when faced with the reality that the enemy is invisible, entrenched, and firing with impunity. By 0640 am, 10 minutes after the ramp dropped, Company A is functionally destroyed. 96% of the unit is a casualty. Of the nearly 200 men who landed in the first wave at Dog Green, only a handful are still capable of firing a weapon. The boats that delivered them are backing away, some filled with the dead who never made it off the ramp, others burning and sinking after taking direct hits from anti-tank guns. The water is littered with floating equipment helmets, packs, rifles, and life preservers, creating a debris field that washes up against the bodies of the fallen. The destruction of Company A creates a terrifying gap in the American line. The follow-up waves, scheduled to land minutes later, are motoring toward a sector that is completely unsecured. The coxswains of the second wave peer through the sea spray, expecting to see American troops advancing up the bluffs. Instead, they see a beach devoid of movement, piled with khaki lumps that look like driftwood. As they get closer, the realization hits them. The first wave has been wiped out. They are not reinforcing a beachhead. They are landing in a graveyard. As the second wave approaches, the German gunners shift their fire to the fresh targets. The barrels of the MG-42S are hot enough to burn skin, requiring the crews to change them rapidly, a drill they perform in seconds. The piles of spent brass casings on the floor of the bunkers grow ankle-deep. To the German defenders, the American assault looks suicidal, a mindless push of flesh against concrete. They do not understand why the boats keep coming, why the soldiers keep walking into the fire. They simply keep pulling the triggers. The mechanical rhythm of the slaughter continuing unabated. On the beach, the survivors of Company A are paralyzed. The shock of the massacre has induced a catatonic state in many. They press their bodies into the wet sand, trying to become part of the earth. The sound of the battle is a continuous roar. But for the men of the 116th at Dog Green, the war has effectively ended. They have done their job. They have drawn the enemy's fire and marked the targets with their lives. The story of Omaha Beach will eventually turn. But for the Bedford boys, the story is over. Written in blood on a patch of French sand that will forever be associated with their sacrifice. High above the bloody shoreline of the Colleville sector, within the concrete embrace of Widerstandsnest 62, the war looks entirely different than it does from the water. For Obergefreiter Heinrich Severloh, peering through the narrow firing slit of his emplacement, the invasion fleet does not look like a liberation force. It looks like a horizon made of steel. The sheer number of ships stretching as far as the eye can see is a terrifying spectacle that defies comprehension. Yet, as the ramp of the landing craft drops below him, the vast armada becomes irrelevant. His world narrows down to the iron sights of his weapon and the grey figures stumbling into the surf just hundreds of yards away. Widerstandsnest 62 is not merely a single bunker. It is a sprawling, interconnected fortress complex that serves as the linchpin of the Omaha defenses. Dug into the limestone bluffs, it commands a sweeping view of the beach, covering the exits of both the E3 draw and the F1 draw. The strong point consists of trenches, Tobruk pits for mortars, concrete casemates for artillery, and machine gun nests, all surrounded by barbed wire and minefields. It is a masterpiece of defensive engineering designed to survive naval bombardment and repel infantry assaults. The men inside feel the earth shake from the heavy shells of the USS Texas, but the reinforced concrete holds, protecting the lethal mechanisms inside. Severloh grips the handles of his MG-42, a weapon known to the terrified Americans as Hitler's buzzsaw due to its terrifying rate of fire, capable of spitting out over 1,200 rounds per minute. The gun does not fire distinct shots, but rather produces a continuous, ripping sound like canvas tearing. From his open foxhole, Severloh has a clear field of fire across the entire eastern sector of the beach. He is not firing directly forward but at an angle, utilizing enfilade fire that strikes the American lines from the side. This geometric advantage means a single burst can pass through multiple men, maximizing the lethality of every pull of the trigger. The mechanics of the slaughter are grueling and physical. The barrel of the machine gun heats up rapidly, glowing red and threatening to warp under the friction of the bullets. Every few minutes, Severloh has to pause, grab an asbestos mitt, and swap the scorching barrel for a cool one, a drill he has practiced until his hands move with automatic precision. The spent brass casings pile up around his boots, rising to his ankles, hot and metallic smelling. The air in the emplacement is thick with the acrid smoke of cordite, burning the eyes and throat. But there is no time to cough. The targets are relentless, just a few dozen meters away, inside a concrete pillbox. 18-year-old Franz Gockel mans a Polish-made water-cooled machine gun. Unlike Severloh's open position, Gockel is protected by overhead concrete, but his view is restricted to a narrow sector. He fights a constant battle against his equipment. The fabric ammunition belts swell from the damp sea air, causing the gun to jam repeatedly. He curses, clearing the stoppages with frantic fingers while watching the Americans advance. When his machine gun fails completely, he picks up his Kar-9 8K rifle, taking careful aim at the soldiers attempting to cut the wire at the base of the bluff. Behind the machine gunners, Lieutenant Bernhard Frerking, the artillery observer, stands calmly with a field telephone pressed to his ear. He is the conductor of this orchestra of destruction. From his vantage point, he calls down fire from the 105mm howitzer batteries stationed miles inland. He does not need to guess the range. Every patch of sand, every obstacle, and every runnel of water has been measured and registered on his maps for months. He speaks coordinates into the mouthpiece, and seconds later, geysers of sand and body parts erupt on the beach. He watches the destruction through his binoculars, adjusting the fire to follow the shifting tides of the frantic mobs below. The defensive strategy relies heavily on the psychological impact of the Devil's Garden. The minefields laid out to channel the attackers into specific kill zones. The Germans have placed millions of mines along the Atlantic Wall, and the bluffs at Omaha are sown with bouncing Bettys and Schuh mines designed to maim. The defenders watch as American engineers, desperate to clear a path, blow gaps in the wire only to find themselves pinned down in the open. The German riflemen pick off the leaders and the men carrying explosives, ensuring that the obstacles remain intact. The beach remains a trap with no exit, forcing the invaders to bunch up in the sights of the machine guns. Despite the carnage they are inflicting, a cold knot of fear tightens in the stomachs of the German defenders. They were told that the invasion would be crushed at the water's edge, that the Atlantic Wall was impenetrable. Yet, looking out at the sea, the waves of landing craft seem infinite. For every boat they destroy, 2 more appear from the mist. For every platoon they wipe out, another takes its place in the blood-soaked surf. The sheer industrial might of the Allies is on full display, a relentless conveyor belt of men and machines that threatens to overwhelm the defenders through attrition alone. The 352nd Infantry Division, manning these defenses, is composed of combat veterans who learned their trade on the brutal Eastern Front. They are not the soft, static troops the Americans expected. They possess a grim discipline, conserving their ammunition and firing only when the targets are exposed. They know that if the Americans make it up the bluff, the battle turns into close-quarters combat where their advantages vanish. Survival depends on keeping the enemy down on the sand. There is no hatred in their actions, only the desperate logic of war. It is either them or us. As the morning wears on, the return fire from the beach begins to intensify. Initially sporadic and inaccurate, it starts to find its mark. Bullets chip away at the concrete embrasures, sending stone splinters flying into the faces of the gunners. American destroyers, risking running aground, sail dangerously close to the shore to duel directly with the bunkers. A 5-inch shell slams into the cliff face just below Sevelo's position, the concussion lifting him off the ground and making his ears bleed. Dust fills the air, blinding him momentarily, but he shakes it off, reloads, and resumes firing. He cannot stop. The rising tide, which is drowning the American wounded, also complicates the defense. As the water moves up the beach, the target area shrinks. The obstacles that previously provided cover for the attackers are submerged, but the surviving Americans are now closer to the sea wall and the base of the cliffs. This creates a dead zone underneath the angle of the steepest cliffs, where the German heavy guns cannot depress enough to hit them. The defenders resort to rolling hand grenades down the slopes and firing mortar rounds almost vertically to drop them onto the huddled masses below. Inside the command bunker of WN-62, the radio traffic is a mix of frantic reports and cold calculations. Messages stream in from other resistance nests. WN-71 is taking heavy fire. WN-65 has lost its main gun. The German commanders try to shift reserves to the threatened sectors, but the Allied air superiority makes movement behind the lines suicidal. The men in the bunkers realize they are on their own. There will be no Panzer Division charging to their rescue in the next hour. They must hold the line with what they have, or they will die in these concrete tombs. Sevelo notices a change in the American tactics. The soldiers are no longer charging blindly. Small groups are moving in rushes, covering each other with rifle fire. They are finding the defilade spots, the folds in the ground that offer protection. He tracks a specific American soldier crawling through the grass, a man who seems to be directing others. Sevelo fires a burst, but the man disappears behind a ridge. The enemy is adapting. The turkey shoot is evolving into a hunt, and the hunter is beginning to feel like the prey. Ammunition is becoming a critical concern. Sevelo has fired nearly 10,000 rounds since dawn. His shoulder is bruised black and blue from the recoil. His hearing is gone, and his vision is blurred by exhaust fumes. The piles of ammunition crates are dwindling. Runners brave the trench lines to bring fresh belts from the underground bunkers, dodging sniper fire that is now raking the communication trenches. The logistical strain of maintaining such a high volume of fire is immense. If the guns run dry, the defense collapses. By 0700 AM, The initial euphoria of repelling the first wave has faded into a grim determination. The beach below is a scene of unparalleled devastation, a graveyard of burning tanks and shattered bodies. From the German perspective, it looks like a victory. No army could possibly sustain such losses and keep fighting. Yet, looking through his scope, Franz Gockel sees movement. A hand waves. A squad stands up. A tank turns its turret. The Americans are not retreating. They are still there, clinging to the edge of Europe. And they are preparing to come up the hill. While the infantry of the first wave is being decimated on the waterline, a different tragedy is unfolding just offshore involving the specialized armor support. The Allied invasion plan relies heavily on the duplex drive tanks, secret amphibious weapons designed to swim to shore and provide immediate heavy fire support. Encased in collapsible canvas screens and driven by twin propellers, these 30-ton Shermans are engineering marvels in calm water. However, the English Channel this morning is anything but calm, churning with violent swells that far exceed the operational limits of the tank's delicate canvas flotation screens. The decision to launch the 741st Tank Battalion 5,000 yards from shore proves to be catastrophic. As the tanks waddle off the ramp of the LCTs, they are immediately swamped by the rough seas. The canvas screens, held up by pressurized air pillars, buckle under the force of the waves, allowing seawater to cascade into the engine compartments. One by one, the massive steel beasts lose buoyancy and slip beneath the surface. The crews inside, often buttoned up to avoid the spray, are trapped in iron coffins plunging to the bottom of the channel. Panic ensues over the radio networks as tank commanders realize the futility of the launch. They watch helplessly as their sister tanks disappear, leaving only a swirl of bubbles and a few bobbing heads to mark their graves. Of the 29 DD tanks launched for the eastern half of the beach, 27 sink before they ever fire a shot. This loss deprives the assault troops of their most crucial asset, mobile artillery capable of silencing the German bunkers. The infantry is now effectively naked, facing concrete fortifications with nothing but rifles and grenades. Further west, the commanders of the 743rd Tank Battalion make a life-saving decision. Seeing the disaster unfolding with the 741st, they refuse to launch their DD tanks into the sea. Instead, they order the landing craft to drive directly onto the beach, risking the mines and artillery fire to deliver the armor dry. These tanks crash onto the sand and immediately begin engaging the enemy. But they are too few and immobile. Many are knocked out by anti-tank guns within minutes, their burning hulks becoming just another obstacle for the infantry to hide behind. Simultaneously, the Naval Combat Demolition Units, or NCDUs, are struggling to perform the most dangerous job on D-Day. These teams of sailors and combat engineers are tasked with clearing 16 50-yard wide gaps through the beach obstacles to allow follow-up landing craft to beach safely. Each team carries hundreds of pounds of Hugginson packs and Primacord explosives. But like the infantry, they are mislanded, scattered across the beach far from their assigned sectors. Instead of an organized demolition effort, they are isolated groups of men dragging heavy explosives through a shooting gallery. The conditions for the demolition teams are nightmarish. They are working in waist-deep water with bullets splashing all around them, trying to tie explosives to steel beams that are slick with algae and sea spray. To make matters worse, the terrified infantrymen from the first wave are using the very obstacles the engineers are trying to blow up as their only cover. The engineers face a horrific moral dilemma. They have to scream at the soldiers to move, forcing them out into the lethal open fire, so they can destroy the protection that is keeping them alive. In many cases, the engineers cannot convince the shell-shocked infantry to budge. A shouting match ensues amidst the roar of battle, with engineers threatening to blow the obstacles regardless of who is hiding behind them. In the confusion, fuses are cut, timers are set, but often the men are killed before they can detonate the charges. When a team does manage to blow a gap, the explosion sends shrapnel and debris flying, sometimes killing the very engineers who set the charge. The casualty rate among the NCDUs soars to nearly 50% within the first 20 minutes. The rising tide adds a relentless time pressure to their impossible mission. The water is moving up the beach at a rate of inches per minute, rapidly submerging the obstacles. Once the mines and steel hedgehogs are underwater, they become invisible hazards to the incoming landing craft. Capable of ripping hulls apart without warning, the engineers work frantically, often neck-deep in the surf. Trying to feel for the mines with their hands, they are racing against the ocean itself. And the ocean is winning. By 0640 am, only a fraction of the planned gaps have been cleared. Instead of 16 wide avenues for the invasion force, there are only a few narrow, jagged paths through the steel forest. The failure to clear the lanes means that the subsequent waves of landing craft have nowhere to go. They begin to bunch up offshore, circling like confused herds, presenting easy targets for the German artillery spotters. The schedule of the invasion begins to collapse, creating a traffic jam of death in the approach lanes. One particular demolition team, designated Gap Team 10, manages to clear a partial lane despite taking heavy casualties. Their leader, dragging a wounded comrade with one hand while rigging charges with the other, exemplifies the desperate heroism of the moment. They succeed in blowing a path just wide enough for a few boats, but the explosion attracts the attention of a German mortar crew. Moments later, the team is wiped out by a direct hit, their bodies mingling with the debris of the obstacles they just destroyed. The surviving tanks of the 743rd Battalion fight a lonely war on the water's edge, immobilized by thrown tracks or engine damage. They turn into stationary pillboxes. Their turrets spin back and forth, engaging the German muzzle flashes on the bluff. They are the only thing preventing the Germans from focusing all their fire on the infantry. The tank crews, choking on cordite fumes inside their hulls, fire until they run out of ammunition or until an armor-piercing shell finds a weak spot, turning the tank into an incinerator. The view from the incoming landing craft is one of absolute chaos. Coxswains, looking for the marker flags that are supposed to designate the cleared lanes, see nothing but smoke and wreckage. They are forced to make split-second decisions, often ramming their boats onto the obstacles in a desperate attempt to offload their troops. Some boats are impaled on the stakes, detonating the telemines attached to them. The explosions blow the bows off the craft, spilling men and equipment into the deep water where the weight of their gear drags them down. The log, a massive anti-tank ditch dug by the Germans, also comes into play. As the tide pushes the men forward, they encounter runnels and sandbars that disrupt their movement. The engineers, having lost their equipment in the swim, are now fighting as infantrymen. They pick up rifles from the dead and join the huddled masses behind the shingle bank. The distinction between specialist and rifleman vanishes. Everyone is simply a survivor trying to find a patch of sand that isn't being swept by machine gun fire. By 0645 am, the grand plan for the demolition of the Atlantic Wall has largely failed. The beach remains a devil's garden of intact defenses. The few gaps that exist are marked not by flags, but by the burning wrecks of landing craft and tanks. The incoming waves must navigate a labyrinth of death without guidance. The failure of the Gap assault teams is not a failure of courage, but a failure of reality to conform to the optimistic timeline drawn up in dry headquarters rooms in England. As the second wave prepares to land, the situation on Omaha Beach is nearing a breaking point. The fire support is at the bottom of the channel. The obstacles are still in place, and the first wave has been rendered combat ineffective. The beach is closed for business, but the invasion force keeps coming, feeding more men into the grinder. The pile-up of humanity and wreckage at the water's edge grows larger, a dam of flesh and steel holding back the tide of liberation, waiting for something, or someone, to break the deadlock. By 0645 am, the forward momentum of the American invasion has completely collapsed, grinding to a bloody halt at the very edge of the Atlantic. The remnants of the first and second waves have been pushed by the relentless machine gun fire to the only available cover on the entire beach. This is the shingle, a natural bank of smooth, round stones piled up by the tide against a wooden seawall or tangles of concertina wire. Stretching across the shoreline, this fragile berm becomes the last refuge for the battered assault force. Thousands of wet, shivering men are packed shoulder to shoulder behind this low ridge, pressing their bodies so tight against the stones that they are practically burrowing into the earth to escape the storm of lead flying inches above their heads. The psychological state of the army at this moment is one of absolute paralysis. The neatly organized companies and platoons that drilled for months in England have disintegrated into a leaderless, confused mob. Rangers, infantrymen from the 116th and 1st Divisions, combat engineers, and Navy personnel are jumbled together in a chaotic mass. Most of the officers and non-commissioned officers who were supposed to lead the assault are dead in the surf or severely wounded, without commands to move. The natural human instinct for self-preservation takes over completely. Men refuse to lift their heads, staring blankly at the grey stones while their weapons fill with sand and their minds shut down under the sensory overload of constant explosions. While the German guns pin them down from the front, a second and equally relentless enemy attacks from the rear. The tide in the English Channel is rising at a terrifying speed. Consuming the beach at a rate of several feet per minute, the strip of sand between the water and the shingle is shrinking rapidly, forcing the able-bodied men to crawl higher up the bank to avoid being washed away. But for the hundreds of wounded soldiers lying in the tidal flats, this rising water is a slow, agonizing death sentence. Soldiers huddled behind the shingle can hear the screams of their comrades as the cold Atlantic washes over them, but they are too pinned down by sniper fire to crawl back out and save them. The medical situation behind the shingle is catastrophic. The few medics who have survived the landing are overwhelmed, working with no equipment and dirty hands. Plasma bottles have been shattered by bullets or lost in the sea, and morphine syrettes are running out. Men with horrific shrapnel wounds and missing limbs are lying in the wet sand, their blood pooling and mixing with the seawater. The noise of the battle is so deafening that the dying cannot even whisper their final words to the men next to them. The breakdown of the evacuation chain means that the wounded are trapped in the kill zone, piling up along the seawall like debris from a shipwreck. The material power of the American assault force, which was supposed to be its greatest advantage, has been stripped away by the sea and the sand. Vital radios, essential for calling in naval gunfire support and coordinating troop movements, are floating uselessly in the surf or have been destroyed by shrapnel, flamethrowers, Bangalore torpedoes, and mortars lie at the bottom of the runnels or are strapped to the backs of dead men. The infantrymen are left with only their M1 Garans and carbines, many of which are jammed with grit and salt water. They are effectively fighting a modern fortress with little more than bolt-action determination and wet gunpowder. The army is deaf, dumb, and blind. The shingle bank offers protection from direct small arms fire, but it provides no shelter from the high-angle trajectory of the German mortars. The Tobruk pits, hidden behind the bluffs, are now dropping shells directly onto the packed crowds of Americans with impunity. Every explosion along the seawall is catastrophic, sending razor-sharp stone splinters flying like shrapnel. The smooth stones of the shingle become secondary projectiles, maiming men who are not even hit by the bomb fragments. The air is filled with the smell of pulverized rock, cordite, and blood. The sanctuary of the seawall is rapidly turning into a slaughterhouse. Yet the men are too terrified to leave it for the open ground ahead. Any attempt to organize the men is met with immediate and precise lethality. German snipers, positioned in spider holes and camouflaged trenches halfway down the bluffs, watch the shingle like hawks. They are specifically looking for anyone waving an arm, shouting an order, or carrying a map case. As soon as an officer stands up to rally his men or check the lines, a bullet finds him. This systematic elimination of leadership reinforces the paralysis. The soldiers learn quickly that initiative equals death, so they stay down, pressing their faces into the grey stones, waiting for a miracle or for the end. Miles offshore on the command ship USS Ancon, the senior commanders are in a state of growing alarm and confusion. The radio traffic from the beach has gone silent, or consists only of incoherent cries for help. They peer through powerful binoculars, but the heavy smoke from the burning grass and exploding vehicles obscures the action. They can only see the accumulation of wreckage and the lack of forward movement. The terrifying thought begins to circulate among the brass that the invasion has failed. General Omar Bradley, the commander of the First Army, seriously considers the possibility of abandoning Omaha Beach and diverting the remaining forces to Utah or the British sectors. Such a withdrawal would mean abandoning the thousands of men currently clinging to the shingle to death or capture. The men on the beach, unaware that their commanders are contemplating retreat, feel a profound sense of isolation. They watch the destroyers offshore, hoping for fire support. But the ships are hesitant to fire for fear of hitting their own troops in the confused melee. The great armada that filled the horizon at dawn now feels miles away, disconnected from the dirty, intimate reality of the fight for survival on the stones. The soldiers feel forgotten, expendable pawns in a gamble that has not paid off. The paralysis on the beach extends backward into the sea, creating a massive logistical logjam. The coxswains of the third and fourth waves approach the shore only to find no place to land. The waterline is a solid wall of burning tanks, wrecked LCVPs, and floating corpses. Some boats circle aimlessly under fire, waiting for a signal that never comes. Others ram through the debris, crushing the dead and the wounded in a desperate attempt to offload their troops. The confusion results in units landing miles away from their targets, further mixing the disorganized mess on the shingle and adding to the command and control nightmare. Amidst the carnage, the reactions of individual soldiers vary wildly, painting a portrait of human resilience and frailty. A young private, stripped of his helmet and rifle, curls into a fetal position, sobbing for his mother, his mind broken by the shock. Next to him, a grizzled sergeant smokes a wet cigarette, staring numbly at his own severed hand, seemingly in a trance. The bravado of the training camps in England has evaporated completely. There are no heroes here yet, only survivors. They are wet, cold, vomiting from seasickness, and surrounded by the mutilated bodies of their friends. The concept of liberating Europe has been replaced by the singular, primal need to survive the next 60 seconds. The combat engineers, who have suffered arguably the worst casualties, are scattered among the infantry. Their mission to clear the obstacles has largely failed, and they are now fighting as riflemen. Bereft of their explosives and equipment, they huddle with the infantry, their specialized training useless in the face of the stalemate. They know better than anyone that the beach is still blocked, that reinforcements cannot land effectively, and that they are trapped in a box. The frustration is palpable. They came to build a road to victory, and instead, they are hiding behind a wall of rocks. As the clock ticks toward 0700 a.m., the situation reaches its nadir. The Germans are beginning to sense victory. The volume of American fire returning from the beach is negligible. From the bunkers, it looks as though the invasion has been stopped cold at the water's edge. The German artillery observers are now calling in fire missions on the shoreline with relaxed precision, confident that the enemy is going nowhere. They begin to conserve ammunition, picking their targets, believing that the Americans will eventually surrender or be wiped out by the rising tide and the mortars. However, a grim realization begins to dawn on the veteran soldiers scattered among the terrified recruits. Staying behind the shingle is a slow form of suicide. The mortars are dialing in. The tide is rising, and the enemy is maneuvering to flank them. They can't go back because the sea is death. They can't stay here because the shingle is death. The only slim chance of survival lies in the most dangerous direction of all, straight up the hill into the fire. The pressure cooker is about to burst, requiring a spark of leadership to ignite the explosion that will finally breach the Atlantic wall. This realization is not collective but individual. It starts in the minds of the men who have nothing left to lose. They look at the bluffs, then at the water, and do the calculus of survival. They realize that the safety of the shingle is an illusion. The paralysis is about to break, not because of a grand strategy from high command, but because the alternative is to lie there and die. The stage is set for the emergence of the two kinds of people on Omaha Beach, those who are dead, and those who are going to die. By 0700 a.m., the atmosphere along the shingle bank of Omaha Beach undergoes a subtle but critical shift. The initial shock of the slaughter has passed, replaced by a grim, fatalistic clarity among the survivors. The men huddled behind the seawall realize that no evacuation is coming. The Navy is not sending boats to take them off. The only way out is forward, into the teeth of the machine guns. This realization is not sparked by a sudden change in strategy from high command, but by the arrival of key officers who refuse to accept defeat. Among the dead and the dying, a few galvanized leaders begin to stand up, ignoring the air snapping with bullets, to impose their will on the chaos. One of these figures is Brigadier General Norman Dutch Cotter, the assistant commander of the 29th Infantry Division. At 51 years old, Kota is an unlikely action hero, yet he stalks the beach with a cane in one hand and a cigar clamped between his teeth. Seemingly impervious to the fear paralyzing his troops, he walks upright among the prone soldiers, tapping them on the helmet, urging them to move. His presence is electric. Seeing a general officer walking calmly through the fire shame the younger men into action. He spots a group of rangers pinned down near the Vierville draw and yells at them to lead the way, reminding them of their elite status. Further down the beach, in the sector of the 1st Infantry Division, Colonel George Taylor lands with his regimental command group. He finds his men demoralized, hugging the stones of the shingle. Waiting for the end, Taylor, a veteran commander, knows that staying on the beach is a death sentence. He stands up, exposing himself to the enemy fire, and delivers the most famous line of the invasion. He shouts over the roar of the battle that there are only two kinds of people staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. He orders them to get the hell out of there, sparking a desperate energy in the ranks. The leadership that turns the tide is not limited to high-ranking officers. It emerges spontaneously from the non-commissioned officers and junior lieutenants. Sergeants, realizing that their platoons have been decimated, form ad hoc squads from the strangers lying next to them. They strip weapons and ammunition from the dead, discard their heavy assault packs, and prepare to move. The complex battle plan with its timed phases and specific objectives is discarded. The new plan is simple and brutal. Find a fold in the ground, blow a hole in the wire, and kill the Germans in the bunkers above. The first obstacle to any advance is the dense concentration of concertina wire that lines the top of the shingle bank. To breach this, the engineers and infantrymen have to use Bangalore torpedoes, long, connecting steel pipes filled with high explosives. The process of assembling these tubes under fire is nerve-wracking. Soldiers have to shove the long pipes underneath the wire entanglements while machine gun bullets kick up dirt inches from their faces. Once the fuse is lit, they have only seconds to scramble back into cover before the explosion shreds the wire and clears a narrow path through the mines. When the dust from the Bangalore explosion settles, the first brave souls surge through the gaps. They do not charge in a human wave. That would be suicide. Instead, they move in small, scattered groups, darting from crater to crater. They utilize the tactic of fire and maneuver, with one team suppressing the German positions with rifle fire, while another team rushes forward a few yards. This primitive, small unit warfare is the only thing that works. The Germans, accustomed to shooting at static targets on the beach, suddenly find themselves facing elusive, aggressive enemies who are closing the distance rapidly. In the Easy Red sector, a significant breakthrough is achieved by Lieutenant John Spaulding and Sergeant Philip Stretchick of E Company, 16th Infantry. They discover a narrow, defilade path up the bluff that seems to be in a blind spot between two German strongpoints. The heavy German guns cannot depress low enough to hit them, and the smoke from the burning grass obscures their movement. Stretchick, a fearless NCO, kicks mines out of the way and cuts wire fences, leading his men up the steep slope. They are the first Americans to crack the Atlantic Wall, finding the seam in the fortress that no one knew existed. As these small groups begin to scale the bluffs, the geometry of the battle changes. The German defenders in the bunkers suddenly lose their sense of invulnerability. They can no longer focus solely on the slaughter at the water's edge because the enemy is now right outside their back door. Reports start flooding into the German command posts that Americans have penetrated the perimeter. The interlocking fields of fire that made the beach a kill zone are useless against men who are crawling through the trenches and tossing grenades into the firing slits. The hunters are becoming the hunted. On the western side of the beach, General Kota personally supervises the breach of a seawall. Seeing his men hesitant to cross the open ground, he runs forward himself to test the enemy fire. When he survives, the men follow. He directs the placement of a BAR team to suppress a machine gun nest and organizes the flow of troops through the gap. He acts as a traffic cop in hell, channeling the disorganized mob into a focused spearhead. His lead-by-example style proves that the German wall is not impenetrable, breaking the psychological hold of the enemy over his troops. The ascent up the bluffs is a physical nightmare. The slopes are steep, slippery with mud and grass, and sown with anti-personnel mines. Soldiers pull themselves up by grabbing handfuls of vegetation, their boots slipping on the loose soil. Every few yards, a hidden, bouncing Betty mine might detonate, maiming a soldier and halting the advance. Yet, the momentum has shifted. The fear of staying on the beach has become greater than the fear of the mines. The men are driven by a cold rage, a desire to get to the men who have been killing their friends for the last hour. The technological mismatch begins to even out as the range decreases. On the beach, the American rifles were useless against concrete bunkers. But at close range, the M1 Garand and the Browning automatic rifle are devastating. American soldiers reach the trench lines, connecting the bunkers, and begin clearing them with ruthless efficiency. They use white phosphorus grenades to burn out the defenders and satchel charges to collapse the dugouts. The combat becomes personal and savage, fought at distances of less than 10 feet with bayonets, knives, and entrenching tools. The smoke from the grass fires, ignited by the naval bombardment and flares, actually helps the attackers. It drifts across the face of the bluffs, creating a natural smoke screen that blinds the German gunners in the lateral pillboxes. The Americans use this cover to flank the positions that were decimating the beach. What was once a clear shooting gallery for the Germans has become a confusing, smoky brawl where they cannot tell where the next attack is coming from. The rigid German command structure struggles to react to the chaotic, decentralized nature of the American advance. Back on the shoreline, the sight of American troops reaching the top of the ridge sends a jolt of hope through the men still pinned on the shingle. They see the tiny figures of their comrades silhouetted against the sky, standing on the high ground that was previously German territory. This visual confirmation that the ascent is possible breaks the paralysis for thousands more. Wave after wave of men rise from the stones and begin to funnel through the gaps opened by the pioneers. The beach is still under fire, but the sense of hopelessness has evaporated. The cost of these first breakthroughs is exorbitant. The bodies of the men who led the way litter the slopes, marking the path for those behind them. Sergeant Stretchick and Lieutenant Spaulding lose many of their men in the ascent. But the price has been paid, and the return on investment is the survival of the beachhead. The German defensive belt, which was supposed to be unbreakable, has been punctured in multiple places. The integrity of the Atlantic Wall is failing, not because of the heavy tanks or the bombers, but because of the grit of individual infantrymen. By 07:15 a.m., the first American units have not only reached the top of the bluffs, but are beginning to move inland to attack the bunkers from the rear. The slaughter at the water's edge continues, but the outcome of the battle is no longer in doubt. The Americans have a foothold. They have clawed their way out of the meat grinder and are now fighting on equal terms. The two kinds of people's speech has proven prophetic. The dead remain on the sand, but those who were going to die have chosen to fight, and in doing so, they have saved the invasion. As the first hour of the invasion concludes, the dynamic of the battle shifts dramatically due to the intervention of the United States Navy. Frustrated by their inability to support the infantry from a distance, the captains of several destroyers, including the USS Frankfurt and the USS McCook, make a bold decision to violate standing orders. They turn their ships toward the coast, sailing dangerously close to the sandbars, risking running aground in the shallow water. These steel leviathans close to within 800 yards of the beach, so close that the infantrymen on the shore can see the rivets on the hulls and the officers on the bridge, directing fire with binoculars. The impact of this close-range naval support is immediate and devastating for the German defenders. The destroyers' 5-inch guns, which previously struggled to hit the small bunkers from miles out, are now firing with point-blank precision. They act as direct-fire artillery, slamming high-explosive shells directly into the embrasures of the pillboxes that have been tormenting the beach. The concrete casemates shatter under the impact, burying the gun crews inside and silencing the heavy artillery pieces. The terrifying roar of the naval guns boosts the morale of the battered troops on the beach, signaling that the might of the industrial world has finally arrived to back them up. Simultaneously, the small groups of American infantry who managed to scale the bluffs are now wreaking havoc in the German rear. Having bypassed the main firing arcs of the bunkers, they move through the trench networks that connect the strong points. The German defense, designed to face the sea, is ill-equipped to handle attacks from the flanks and rear. American soldiers, driven by the adrenaline of survival and the rage of witnessing the slaughter of their friends. Clear the trenches with grenades and Thompson's submachine guns. The interlocking fields of fire that made the beach a kill zone begin to unravel as the gunners are forced to turn their weapons inward to defend themselves. Inside Widerstands Nest 62. The situation for Heinrich Severloh and his comrades deteriorates rapidly. The endless supply of ammunition is running low, and the barrel of his machine gun is ruined from overuse. More importantly, the sense of invulnerability is gone. They can hear the sounds of American voices and the crack of M1 Garands coming from the communication trenches behind them. The artillery observer, Lieutenant Fröking, realizes that his position is being encircled. The order to retreat is given, but for many in the bunkers, it is too late. The trap they set for the invasion force has become their own tomb, sealed by the men they failed to kill in the first hour. On the beach itself, the cessation of the most intense machine gun fire allows for a grim assessment of the cost of the foothold. The rising tide has reached its peak, concealing the beach obstacles and washing over the rows of the dead. The shoreline is a chaotic boneyard of wrecked machinery, burning tanks, twisted landing craft, and discarded equipment create a barrier of debris. Amidst this wreckage, the surviving medics and uninjured soldiers begin the Herculean task of dragging the wounded above the high water mark. The sand is stained a deep, rusted color, a testament to the sheer volume of blood spilled in 60 minutes. The carnage inflicted on the 116th and 16th Infantry Regiments during this single hour is staggering. In some companies, the casualty rate exceeds 90%. The Bedford Boys of Company A have effectively ceased to exist as a military unit, with nearly every man from the town of Bedford killed or wounded. The command structure has been decapitated, with colonels doing the jobs of sergeants and privates making strategic decisions. Yet, despite these horrific losses, the unit cohesion has not completely broken. The survivors, hardened by the trauma, are no longer green troops. They are veterans of the most intense combat experience in American history. As the smoke begins to clear around 0730 a.m., the follow-up waves of the invasion force approach a beach that is vastly different from the one encountered at H hour. The chaos is still present, but the paralyzing grip of the German defense has been broken. The coxswains of the incoming LCVPs can see the white stars on the tanks of the 743rd Battalion, firing from the water's edge, and the lines of infantry, snake-walking up the bluffs. They are not landing in a slaughterhouse anymore. They are landing in a battle zone where the momentum is swinging in their favor. The landing lanes are still dangerous, but they are open. The German High Command, receiving fragmented reports from the 352nd Division, initially believes they have repelled the invasion. They interpret the piles of bodies and burning wrecks as evidence of a total American defeat. This miscalculation delays the deployment of crucial panzer reserves, as the German generals believe the threat at Omaha has been neutralized. By the time they realize the truth that the Americans have not only survived but breached the Atlantic Wall, it is too late. The fragile crust of the coastal defense has been pierced, and the Allies are pouring men and material through the gaps. The strategic significance of the first hour at Omaha Beach cannot be overstated. Had the paralysis continued, had Colonel Taylor not rallied the men, or had the small groups led by Spaulding and Stretchick not scaled the bluffs, the invasion could have stalled completely. A failure at Omaha would have left a dangerous gap between the British at Gold Beach and the Americans at Utah Beach, potentially allowing the Germans to divide and destroy the Allied beachheads. The success was not achieved by grand strategy or technological superiority, but by the raw, stubborn refusal of the individual soldier to die where he lay. The psychological impact on the German defenders is devastating. They had fired thousands of rounds, inflicted thousands of casualties, and utilized every advantage of terrain and preparation. Yet, the enemy kept coming. The sheer industrial and human relentlessness of the Allied assault breaks the spirit of the 352nd Division. They realize that they are fighting a force that cannot be stopped by attrition. As the German soldiers retreat from their bunkers, abandoning the impregnable Atlantic Wall, they take with them the knowledge that the war has turned. The fortress of Europe has been breached. Back on the shingle, the adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. Men collapse among the stones, shaking uncontrollably as the shock sets in. They smoke cigarettes with trembling hands, staring blankly at the cliffs they just conquered. They do not cheer. There is no celebration. The reality of what they have lost is too heavy. They look for their friends and find only gaps in the ranks. The victory of D-Day is not felt as a triumph in this moment, but as a simple, miraculous fact of continued existence. They are alive. And for today, that is enough. The legacy of the first 60 minutes at Omaha Beach will echo through history. It becomes the ultimate symbol of the brutality and heroism of the Western Front. It serves as a reminder that plans often disintegrate upon contact with the enemy, and that victory often hangs by the thinnest of threads. The meat grinder claimed the lives of thousands, but it failed to stop the liberation of Europe. The blood soaked into the sands of Dog Green, Easy Red, and Fox Green bought the foothold that would eventually lead to the fall of Berlin, as the sun finally climbs higher, burning off the morning mist. The full scale of the invasion fleet is revealed to the men on the heights. Thousands of ships fill the channel, a bridge of steel connecting England to France. The logistical tail of the army is beginning to unload. Trucks, jeeps, and artillery are rolling onto the beach that was a death trap just an hour ago. The Devil's Garden has been cleared, not by machines, but by the bodies of the engineers and infantry. The road to Paris is open. The documentary camera pulls back from the close-up of a lone American helmet lying in the surf, widening the shot to encompass the entire crescent of Omaha Beach. The waves continue to roll in, washing away the blood, but the scars on the land and the memory of the survivors will remain forever. The first hour is over. The longest day has only just begun. But the door to Hitler's fortress Europe has been kicked open, and it will never be closed again.